Dear friends, welcome, marhaba, and bruchim habayim. I am Walter Ruby, president of JAMAAT, which stands for Jews and Muslims and Allies Acting Together. We're a grassroots activist interfaith organization based in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're focused on building ties of communication and cooperation between Jews, Muslims, and interfaith allies. We stand up for each other if either community is under attack or victimized by violence or demonization, and we fight alongside each other in defense of democracy, pluralism, civil liberties, and religious freedom. So you may have noticed that we chose Groundhog Day to hold our Zoom event. Actually, I'm not sure if we thought about it, but suddenly I realized, wow, it's Groundhog Day, and it seemed to make perfect sense. Because, well, we've been experiencing some serious and not so pleasant deja vu these days. It's worth pointing out that JAMAAT was founded after the 2016 election to respond to Islamophobia and anti-Semitism arising during the outset of the first Trump administration. And I would say that we and other groups had some success in the ensuing years, very important success, I think, in building alliances through which many Jews pushed back against the Muslim ban, and the Muslim community stood in solidarity and support of the Jewish community in the aftermath of the Tree of Life synagogue massacre. So all that happened, and yet 8 years later, here we are again. Muslims, Jews, and allies face even greater potential peril to our core values from a more extreme and less restrained second Trump administration. In short, we believe it is time for all hands on deck. We need to shake off despondency and work together to defend our rights and those of all communities. So during this program, we'll be concentrating on 3 issues which we see as the greatest challenges to our values emerging from the new Trump agenda, on the issues of immigration, civil liberties, and likely policy initiatives on Israel, Palestine, and the larger Middle East. And we have lined up 3 really great speakers, 3 experts on these topics. They are Harris Tarin, Vice President for Policy and Planning at the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC, and a former senior policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security. Dov Kent, a longtime grassroots organizer and writer who is the U.S. advisor at the Diaspora Institute. And finally, Professor Michael Barnett, University Professor of International Relations and Political Science at George Washington University. So they'll be giving their presentations, and following their presentations, there will be a Q&A with questions posed to the speakers by JAMAAT board member Rabbi Melanie Aaron. So if you have a question as you listen to their presentations and you say, I'd like to ask that, please post your question in the chat room. And Rabbi Melanie will take as many, she'll ask as many of the questions to our speakers as we have time for. And after that, JAMAAT board member and advisor Andra Bayless will explain how we will split into breakout sessions on the 3 topics. And finally, I'm just concluding. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to our board member, Vedat Samur, our tech expert extraordinaire, who will administer today's Zoom event. Vedat, if you can take a bow for a second.
Hi, everyone.
There he is. I think you'll be very impressed. We certainly are. We could not do this without him, that's for sure. So I will now, at this point, turn the program over to Rabbi Melanie Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone. Just to remind you that if you'd like to see the speaker rather than all of our faces, you're welcome to do that with the speaker view. Usually it's in the right-hand corner of your computer. And as Walter mentioned, we do have a chat function, so please feel free to put your questions there. I want to apologize for the brevity of the introductions that I will make, but we want to save time for our speakers and also for your questions. So first, I'm delighted to welcome Harris Tarin, as Walter mentioned, Vice President of Policy and Programming for the Muslim Public Affairs Council. With decades of experience in the federal government, he has worked on issues relating to immigration, civil rights, civil liberties, and national security. As Chief of Staff for Operation Allies Welcome, he managed the largest U.S. evacuation and refugee resettlement program in our nation's history. Harris comes to us after appearances on national and international news outlets, including CNN, the BBC, and even Fox News. So Harris, we turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I appreciate you and Walter and Vedat and team. Thank you so much for bringing us together and for allowing us to have a critical conversation in some very interesting, difficult, and extraordinary time. We live in an extraordinary time, and this gathering is extremely important, and I'll go into why I think that is for a few minutes. But I do want to start off by thanking everyone for joining because, you know, this last year, the name of this group and what brings us together is our values, our background, our identities. We're Jews, we're Muslims, and allies. That is the name of this group. But this group, Jews and Muslims and even allies, over the past year and a half, have been through a very difficult period. It's been a difficult phase for both of our communities. What has been taking place, what took place on October 7th, and then what has been taking place since in Gaza over the past year and a half has been a trying times for Muslims and for Jews. It has been a time that has tested partnerships. It has tested relationships. It has tested us being, it has even tested our shared values. You know, I did a short stint before I got into policy and government and all of that. I did a short stint in studying theology. And I remember the one thing that I took away from the year of studying theology, which was, my goodness, Muslims and Jews essentially have the same faith and same understanding in so many ways. And we have so many shared values. We have so much of our shared experiences and jurisprudence and values. And I think much of that has been tested over the past year and a half, more than I think any period of my life as being involved in these conversations around interfaith and engagement and understanding. So we are approaching this time with strained relationships, strained conversations. And this is why a conversation in a platform in a place like this is of utmost importance and experience. So, because number one, we need to now figure out how we move towards a understanding and an engagement about the Middle East and what's happening there that will bring us together as communities. And the second thing we need to do is figure out how do we drown out the voices of the extremists in all of our communities? Because the voices of the extremists are the ones that are now controlling the narrative about Gaza, about Israel, about Palestinians, and our shared experience here in the US as Muslims and Jews. And we have to figure out how do we minimize and marginalize those voices and make sure that we're uplifting voices like yours on this call. So those shared values that we have are not just when it comes to Palestine and Israel and Gaza and the Middle East, but we have shared values as Americans. You know, I was in government. I was at the Department of Homeland Security in 2017 when the Muslim ban took place. I was dealing with immigration issues. I was dealing with deportation issues. I was at the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties at the department, and I saw the strain on us. But you know what? When I was at Dulles Airport, I was standing next to Jewish lawyers who were supporting Muslim communities at that moment. Those shared values are values that we can't forget because in the next 4 years, this agenda of marginalization, this agenda of extremism that Trump is leading, and it's not just Trump this time. In 2017, it was just Trump. It is now a group of individuals who have found a way to not only increase their wealth, but their power and their ability to control our nation's destiny, and even in their mind, the destiny of the world. The Elon Musks, the Peter Thiels, the individuals who don't see humanity, shared values, faith, and taking care of the most vulnerable in society as a positive thing. They see it as a weakness. And that is what we're dealing with now in this next 4 years. So those shared values that we have to now be at the forefront, and we have to figure out how to come together as Jews, Muslims, and allies to address this. Now, as it pertains to the issue of immigration, which I was asked to talk about, and I'll briefly address this. The immigration issue right now is a issue that has deep roots in American history. When we are going through a transition as a nation historically, we have blamed the most vulnerable. We have blamed those who don't look like us, don't speak like us, don't eat like us. That, you know what, today, which was interesting, I opened up Twitter or X, and the first thing I saw on X was a post by an Elon Musk supporter saying, in Ireland, there are now Somali restaurants opening up and Irish pubs closing. Just imagine the pathology that you have to think like that, rather than engaging and diversity and engaging and saying that these are small business owners who will help our economy. They are disparaging that diversity that's happening in Ireland. So the first thing is that this is not anything new. This is something immigrants have been blamed in this country for millennia. They've been blamed since the inception of this country, whether those immigrants were forced to come here or those immigrants chose to come here. We have been blaming immigrants. So the raids that are taking place now are on another level this time. It is not just raids in homes or businesses. Now the raids are moving to sensitive locations, which historically we as a government have decided we're not going to go into a church. We're not going to go into a synagogue. We're not going to go into a hospital. We're not going to go into a elementary school or a middle school or a high school and pick up people, because we have a level of humanity. Even as we're enforcing our laws and our policies, we take into consideration a level of humanity. When I was at DHS, the first time the Trump administration came in and talked about the idea of going into sensitive locations, we pushed back, and there was a level of pushback. This time, there is some pushback, but they've essentially done a hostile takeover of the Department of Homeland Security. They're going into churches, they're going into synagogues, they're going into schools. They don't care whether it's sensitive locations, whether it's someone's home, whether it's someone's house of worship. And the reason that is, my dear friends, is that it's not that they're actually going to pick up people from there. What they're saying is that there is no place in this country where someone can remain safe. There is no place in this country where the most vulnerable feel like they have an ally, they have a friend, they have someone who can protect them and who can take care of them. It is not just an act of enforcement, physical enforcement, it is an act of psychological enforcement. That is extremely important, because psychological enforcement is even more at times harmful than physical enforcement. Because once you do psychological enforcement, intimidation, you not only scare the person, but you scare the allies. You scare the people around them. You scare their family, their friends, the people who are willing to go out of their way and protect them. That is what they're trying to do. And what we have to say is we have to stand up and say, no, we will not be intimidated. We have some laws and values that we will protect. So those raids on sensitive locations, the point of those raids is to create fear. Number two, the point of those raids is to ensure that people are turning on each other. That's what they want. They want Black communities to turn on Latino communities. They want Latino communities to turn on Black communities. They want white working class communities who actually not only benefit most from government benefits and SNAP and Medicaid. They are willing to get people to turn on each other, and people will accept it even though it harms themselves. When I go to West Virginia, I visit West Virginia quite often because I've got friends there and we've got donors there for our organization. You know, the most vulnerable in West Virginia are not Latinos, They're not Black communities. They're white working class Americans who are on SNAP and on Medicaid and Medicare, and those are the people we're also harming. So that turning on each other is what they're trying to do. And then number three, it's a playbook that has been used by authoritarians forever. Blame the most vulnerable, blame the most vulnerable, and other people will stand behind you. That is just essentially what they're doing. So that the raids, the ICE raids, and the not only the raids themselves, but the props, bringing in Dr. Phil to cover this. You know, wearing cowboy hats as you sit in front of the Department of Homeland Security's logo, the propping of this whole process, the dramatic Hollywood type of imagery is what they're doing, and they're trying to show people that they have the strength to do this. And I think what we
Thank
can
you.
do is you don't. Sorry?
Thank you so much for clarifying what the purpose and the effect of these raids are, and they're so devastating. And having worked in California, the idea of sanctuary and violating that sanctuary, I get to ask one really quick question, and that has to do with the accusation that we're only rounding up felons, murderers, and thieves, and axe murderers, and yet I understand they are designating as a felon anyone who's broken any immigration law. Can you provide a little clarity on that?
Correct. So, you know, what's interesting is this is exactly what they say. But the problem is when you kind of peel back the rhetoric a little bit, you'll see a few things. What does breaking the law mean for them? Now, breaking the law means being a pro-Palestinian student on college campuses. So, in the next few days, you will see, because I've been talking to friends in government now, in the next few days, you're going to start seeing raids on universities. What was pro-Palestinian students who are on visas here, student visas, that act of protest will now be a criminal act for a student on a visa. So that number one. Number two, when they go after so-called criminals, for them, a criminal, it's not just the rapist, the axe murderer, the mass or serial killers that they talk about. When they go into a location, they pick up everyone. They might go in with a warrant for one person, but everyone in that location is going to be impacted. Everyone in that location, whether they've committed an act of, whether they've broken the law, and it's a misdemeanor, a felony. But what will happen is when they pick up everyone, not everyone will be a criminal, but they all, in the eyes of this administration, have broken the law by entering this country, so they will all be part of the deportation process. And now, claiming that they're going to open up 30,000 beds in Guantanamo Bay, you're going to take innocent civilians who have never done anything wrong other than to try to seek a better life for themselves, and you're going to put them in Guantanamo Bay, a place which is a stain on our national conscience for the past 2 decades, but you are going to put simple folks who've come for a better life, cross the border for a better life, you're going to put them in Guantanamo Bay. So those are talking points. I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go on and introduce Dove Kent. She is the United States advisor at Diaspora Alliance and has decades of experience in grassroots organizing, political education, and movement building. She has served as the senior strategy officer at Bend the Arc and as the executive director of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, both progressive organizations in the Jewish world. Dove teaches nationally and has been published in many anthologies and news outlets, including The Guardian and Haaretz, which is Israel's progressive newspaper of record. She is the co-author of the groundbreaking Understanding Anti-Semitism and Offering to Our Movement, which presents a more grounded approach for combating this form of racism. And Dove, we're so pleased that you'll be speaking to us about the issues around civil liberties in this current administration. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very moved to be here today, so thank you. It's quite a day. Over the past 2 weeks, we've all seen the initial and very painful rollout of Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's sweeping agenda for a second Trump administration to really dismantle and then remake the federal government into a MAGA project. And we are seeing countless attacks on civil liberties and civil rights. I'm just going to name a few of them. Trump's executive order that purports to expand free speech and prevent government censorship, but which in substance is really designed to stifle the government, think tanks, and social media companies from acknowledging misinformation and disinformation, especially by MAGA supporters. The pausing of all expenditures for foreign assistance based on the purpose of getting political control over these activities. The attempt to limit media coverage to the MAGA media, following up on Trump's longtime depiction of press he doesn't like as the enemy of the people, which we've seen as an authoritarian move used by other leaders, and his attempt to shut down critics through his libel suits. And we have this really war on civil rights through the elimination of DEI programs and the suppression in schools against teaching anything that doesn't represent what could rightfully be called a segregationist ideology. We know that many of these executive orders, if not all of them, will be challenged in court. And yet that cannot be our only means of response at this time, which we'll get to soon. But today for us, for this community here, what I really want to hone in on is part of this administration's plan that was already referenced, but that uses the Jewish community and really co-ops legitimate Jewish fear in service of anti-democratic ends. It's also likely to disproportionately impact Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian Americans because of the deep Islamophobia, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian racism woven into it. And that plan is called Project Esther, and it's the Heritage Foundation's manual for combating anti-Semitism. So this plan sets out steps to dismantle any domestic group that supports Palestinian rights, something they call the Hamas Support Network. Their first targets are pro-Palestinian organizations, but ultimately who they're after is what they call a broader coalition of leftist progressive organizations and philanthropies, which they accuse of not just being anti-Israel, but anti-American. The plan also claims that any organization working against capitalism is also aligned with, quote, America's overseas enemies and should be a target. And the tools it calls for using include anti-terrorism criminal prosecution, deportations, public firings, removal of tax-exempt status, blocking of funding, and campaigns to sow discord within movements to disrupt and degrade progressive philanthropies and institutions. And so we can really see the very McCarthyist intentions here, which is dismantling any domestic organizing that they deem anti-American, and it's under the guise of fighting threats to Jewish safety. I want to also note that this so-called plan against anti-Semitism has virtually no Jewish authors, as is evident from interviews with the Heritage Foundation. The plan's use of phrases like reformed Judaism and erroneous references to Jewish texts, like its first sentence incorrectly locates the book of Esther in the Torah. And the writers also chastise American Jews for not aligning with their views of anti-Semitism or agreeing with their proposals for its solution. They call us complacent and our positions inexplicable. A leader of the Heritage Foundation's anti-Semitism task force said that, quote, if Jews were doing their job and being effective, we wouldn't have the problem that we have. So I just want to emphasize how galling it is that Project Esther appears to be written by a group of Christian nationalists chastising Jews for not understanding how to combat anti-Semitism. And this plan has nothing to say, as we might imagine, about any of the explicitly anti-Semitic hate groups aligned with the far right, or about one of the core drivers of anti-Semitic violence in the United States, conspiracy theories that are regularly promoted by figures within Trump's administration, his friends like Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, and Trump himself. So how did we get here? Is it really possible that a group of Christian nationalists are just doing this with no buy-in from Jewish groups whatsoever. That's actually not the whole story. It needs to be named that the groundwork for this plan has been laid by legacy Jewish institutions like the ADL, AJC, and other groups that smear all Palestine solidarity action as anti-Semitic incidents, downplay the threat of the right wing, and support suppressing political speech through federal enforcement, all of which has paved the way for what we're seeing now. So it's increasingly critical for American Jews in particular to say unequivocally that we will not be made safer by the erosion of American democracy through Project Esther or any related efforts that wear away at constitutional rights in the name of our community safety. We know that the high levels of security and freedom that Jews have experienced in the US are due to our constitutional democracy and protections for minorities. So supporting the unraveling of those protections in the supposed name of our safety is never going to work. And under this plan, there would be immense potential for abuse against free speech, the media, political organization, and political opponents across the spectrum. So as you may have seen, I was just referenced, Project Esther has already started rolling out. This past week, the administration put out an executive order supposedly to combat anti-Semitism that includes plans to revoke foreign visas and deport students accused of anti-Semitism on college campuses, using a definition of anti-Semitism that includes just criticism of the state of Israel. This past spring, we saw the right wing use Jewish fears about rising anti-Semitism to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and other racial justice initiatives at college campuses. And now campuses are becoming another site of their deportation agenda, again, using Jewish fear as a cover. And we Jews have a history of centuries of expulsions as political pawns of governments. We know that our country is not made safer by politically motivated deportations of anyone. So the moment for resistance is upon us. But luckily, I really believe that Jewish and Muslim communities are organized and up for the task. So what is resistance going to need to look like? It will demand that we defend the organizations that are singled out for political prosecution, including groups like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. And as many of us breathe a sigh of relief at the sights of Israeli and Palestinian hostages being returned to their families and communities, and we pray that the ceasefire continues to hold, we know that the devastation wrought by Israel's war on Gaza and the ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people is far from over. So defending the Palestinian rights movement will mean protecting their legitimate right to speech and protest and calling on institutions to refuse unjust orders and protect their students and community members. And it will also mean that the hundreds of thousands of us advocating against Trump's mass deportation of immigrants must include these college students. So while the ADL is out defending Elon Musk's Nazi salute and proving themselves not up to the task of any meaningful resistance to the anti-democratic onslaught we're experiencing, nor are they up to the task to actually protecting American Jews in this new political environment, we can make a different choice. And we've seen regular people taking action matters. I just want to finish by mentioning a bill called HR 9495 that was up before the House of Representatives in November, which on its surface claims to ensure that nonprofits don't provide support to terrorist organizations, something that is already well covered by other laws, but in effect would give the Treasury Department the authority to unilaterally accuse any nonprofit organization of supporting terrorism and revoke their nonprofit status without any need to actually prove their case. The ACLU calls this a blank check for presidents to shut down organizations that criticize them. But when it came up for a vote on November 12th, 52 Democrats voted in favor of it. But organizers were quickly able to reach a critical mass of people in the nonprofit sector with education about the political impacts of the bill and clear steps of how to oppose it. There was an organizing blitz, and in the course of only 9 days, the number of Democrats supporting the bill for the final vote dropped from 52 to 15. So by reducing the Democrat yes votes to 15, it helped ensure that the Senate wouldn't take up the bill, and so it did die last session. We know this fight. I was going to say we know the fight's not over, but there's a path.
Yeah, there is a path, and I'm really proud that my reform movement was part of that battle. And the Jewish community, though divided, is sort of divided 15% to 85% or 25% to 75%. But I think that there's a strong support for civil liberties. I just want to ask you a question. I remember the hysteria over Islamic law, and it led to a number of laws which then made it difficult for Jewish Beit Dins, Jewish rabbinic courts, to function. So I'm asking you, we tend to get so distracted by shiny objects. How can we keep our eyes on the really important civil liberties? And I only give you 1 minute. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have two answers to that. One is I think we're not going to all be able to respond to everything. So I feel like it's identifying what is like you individually or your organization or your community really well positioned to do, whether it's your skills, your relationships, your experience, whatever it is, and go hard there. Like, don't try to do 20 things. Do what you're positioned well to do, and then put out feelers of who else is positioned to do that and try to act in as much unison as possible. But I think part of what the administration is doing, right? We know this shock and awe. They've put out so much that we can't even keep up with the news, much less respond to all of it together. And I would say, don't try, go hard on what you're able to, and just be like in as much communication with allies on other issues as possible.
Good advice for organizing. Thank you so much. I'm going to go on now to our third speaker. We will come back to all the speakers with questions after the third speaker has spoken. I'm going to introduce Michael Barnett, University Professor of International Affairs and Political Science at George Washington University. He's published many articles and books on the Middle East, humanitarianism, global governance, global ethics, and the United Nations. His most recent books include Israel and the One-State Reality, which was co-edited with Nathan Brown, Mark Lynch, and Shibli Telhami. Though I hope he will bring us some reasons for courage and hope in these difficult times, I noticed that the title of his forthcoming book is The End of Humanity, an Autopsy of the Present and Future, which assures that his assessment of current events will be without rosy-colored glasses. So, Professor Barnett, I'm asking you, what do you see in this new Trump administration, the good, the bad, and the ugly? Turning it over to Professor Barnett, please unmute.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you, and I'm a little bit in awe of having a follow on those two excellent presentations. I'm not really sure where to begin, but if you're hoping I'm going to end with something rosy, well, it won't be from me. Maybe it'll be from somebody else in the group. So I was asked to talk about the Trump administration and foreign policy, but with a specific emphasis on the Middle East, which of course is something that everybody at this webinar is knowledgeable about and concerned about. And I want to just offer a few points because there's obviously so much that we could cover, and I just want to put a few things on the table that you may have been thinking about, but maybe a few you haven't. The first thing is just to pick up on this book that I did with my three colleagues called Israel and the One-State Reality. Now, we wrote that. It came out in the spring of 2023, so months before Gaza. And essentially, our argument was that while we talk about Israel as Israel being really within the 67 borders, and then we talk about the occupied territories as separate, in fact, Israel is now one state that goes from, to use that polemical phrase now, from the river to the sea. And it's not to say that it is a state that has legal authority. There's no legal recognition by any country in the world of Israel's sovereignty over the occupied territories, with the exception of the U.S. when it comes to East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. But essentially, if we think about the state as
So leave your name, number, and a brief message, and I'll call you.
Thank you, Charles. And if you think about it in terms of, Israel, the state as a mechanism of control, Israel has what amounts to be a fair amount of control, certainly over the Golan Heights and Jerusalem and the West Bank and even Gaza. And that control is made possible by force. Whatever people thought of years ago that this was a benign occupation, which is for me an oxymoron. There are no occupations that are benign. They're maintained by coercion and force. That's how they thrive. The thing to know, though, about, as far as I was concerned, about sort of the days before October of 2023.
We'd really love to focus on the Trump administration and moving forward, since our time is so limited.
Okay, well, I will say that this is actually an important element, because what I'm trying to do is actually provide you a little bit of the forest so that you have an understanding of where Trump is right now. And that forest is this one state reality in which there are there have been different mechanisms of control by Israel over Gaza and the West Bank. And we saw with the brutality that control requires over the last 400 and odd days. It is devastating. And while most of our attention has been focused on Gaza, we should not ignore what has also been happening in the West Bank, which is its own form of expulsion and exclusion and coercion and violence. Now, the question that was with us on October 6th, that will continue to be with us today, is that Israel continues to be a one-state reality. It is the same Israel as before. The only difference is that its grip now on the West Bank and Gaza is tighter than ever, and it's more willing to use force without justification when it believes that that force can either be a response or to a perceived threat, or in fact, it helps to deter potential threats and allows Israel to continue to expand its control over the territories. What this means then, and this is, I know, will be controversial for some, but second nature for others, is that when you think about Israel and you understand that it is a one-state reality in which one people controls the destinies of another, and that the demographics are pretty much split now between Jews and non-Jews, there is no other way to describe it than as apartheid. There are some who will quibble given international law and the emphasis on race, but most scholars have accepted a little broader definition of apartheid, and what's taking place in Israel is nothing short of apartheid. This has not changed. It was clearly and apparent prior to Gaza. It's clear now with Gaza. And I will say that this has all come about because of U.S. complicity and assistance. There is no way that any of this would have happened had there been opposition from Congress, from White House. You saw what was a very feckless Biden administration when it came to these issues, and certainly with respect to the kinds of war crimes that were being committed by Israel in Gaza. So what does that leave for Trump? It means that essentially what Trump has inherited, and what he also helped to bring about during his 4 years and anchor, is that one state reality. Now, my sense, just sort of offering a little bit of speculation, is that for Trump, he's going to find himself torn a bit with respect to what to do with this one state reality. On the one hand, from the outside looking in, this is someone who should really have a nice bromance with Prime Minister Netanyahu, because Trump seems to be a fellow ideological traveler, also in support of a one-state reality. But Trump really isn't an ideologue. I mean, there's no evidence that he has any values or commitments to anything beyond himself. And there's some evidence that what Trump really does, I guess, wish for is something called that Nobel Peace Prize. For some reason, all US presidents come into office wishing that they're going to be the ones to solve the Middle East conflict and go down in history. And Trump is not immune to that fantasy. But in order to accomplish that, there's no doubt in my mind, and in the minds of most experts, that the only way that will happen is if there's a Palestinian state. It will not happen any other way. And so the question becomes, as Trump begins to give Israel what it wants, and watch carefully during the sequence, the three-stage sequence of the ceasefire, how far Trump is willing to give Netanyahu and the extremists with respect to their desire to institutionalize this one-state reality that's apartheid.
So
my sense is that Trump is going to be torn a bit because he's also very close to the Saudis and others, and knows well that they're not going to do anything that would helpfully bring Israel into the fold unless there is something for the Palestinians.
Thank you. That was exactly the direction that we were curious, because on the one hand, one could see Trump strengthening Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are so problematic, who are so destructive of Palestinian life in the West Bank. On the other hand, you could see him forcing the Israeli government to move because of his desire to create this great peace with Saudi Arabia. In light of that, how do you explain his various plans to deport so many Palestinians, whether to Jordan and Egypt or whether to Indonesia? It doesn't seem congruent with any desire to move forward with the Saudis.
No, but I'm not sure the Saudis are really going to care all that much, quite honestly. They've not been great defenders of the Palestinians before, and the faithful when they've needed assistance. So I don't, I doubt that there are back channel conversations taking place right now between the palace and White House. So I don't think the Saudis would necessarily jeopardize their relations with the United States because of student activists who, quite honestly, I would imagine the Saudis would be likely to deport if there was a similar situation. I think the interesting question here, and this is one that's going to confront, I think, again, the Jewish American community, is what does Israel do? Because, while we think that the U.S. can put Israel under its thumb and force it to do things it doesn't want to do, this is not an Israel that's the same today as it was in 2023. And I doubt that, there will be much support in Israel for anything that even begins to have a facsimile of a Palestinian state. So I would imagine there are going to be, if this plays out the way I suggest it might, there are going to be real tensions. And so I think one of the things to be watching here is what those tensions look like. If I could add just one thing here, because I noticed that both Harris and Dove finished their presentations with "What can you do?" And we all feel helpless, especially from thousands of miles away. There are two things that I personally have done. One is I've increasingly am trying to support when I do give, I try to support Israeli civil society because they're being shut down. And if there's any hope whatsoever, and I don't think there's much hope, it's going to require something from it, from when we talk Israeli civil society, for those activists who are really pressured hard, who are trying to keep, basic freedoms alive in Israel. The other is, and these are sort of small grassroots activities that have come out of some synagogues, which is paying reparations to Palestinian families who have been harmed by the Israeli Defense Forces and settler communities. So it's a way of saying that our obligations are not only to Israel, but to Israel's victims. And I find that a very provocative and courageous move, because we all know how that can be taken.
Well, we're very appreciative of your remarks. As someone who's worked with Omdim B'Yachad and ACRI, the Israeli ACLU, there are lots of organizations still working after October 7th on Israeli civil society. And you may know that JAMAAT has been a big supporter of Rosanna, which deals with health care for victims. So we appreciate your remarks. I'm going to turn to a question that maybe goes to Harris or Dov at first. And that is the question of people aren't feeling safe about going to protests and speaking out. Can you address that, and can you perhaps encourage? And then I have a second question, hopefully from our Q&A for everyone. But let's start with that.
Dov, did you want to go first, please?
Go ahead.
One of the points that I mentioned was that, the shock and awe approach of the administration and this intensity is meant to really instill fear into the hearts of not just those who are they're going after necessarily. It's also us, Americans, who might, be questioning ourselves. Should we go to a protest? Should we stand by an ally? Should we stand by the most vulnerable? Is it really worth it? Do I want to put myself in this situation? And I think that's part of the goal. Authoritarianism functions in that manner. That's the strength of authoritarianism. And I think what we have to do is make sure that we don't give into those instincts as Americans. We kind of go back to the legacy of civil disobedience. We go back to the legacy of civil rights and civil liberties and the various movements who stood up in face of authoritarian behavior by federal, state, local authorities. And I think there's going to I know there are those folks in government. I left government 5 months ago. I was in government for about 10 years. I left 5 months ago. And I left not because of the Trump administration. I left because it was time for me to move on. But I know my colleagues in government are going through that process and that internal struggle, but I also know they're going to stand strong as much as they can. And what we need to do as Americans on the outside is not give in to those fears and those instincts. Get out, speak up, because the way they are overwhelming us with the shock and awe, we need to overwhelm this administration with our shock and awe of solidarity and engagement. And if we do that, they will step back, because we already got one win. When they cut grant funding, when the Office of Management Budget cut all grant funding across the country domestically, civil society pushed back, and we won that. That was a battle that we won, and we can win many of those. I know that people are really overwhelmed, but I think once we start to organize, we will see more wins taking place. Dov?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that, folks that have done a lot of either their own experience or study about the rise of authoritarian regimes will say that one of the things that happens very immediately is people acquiesce to what they believe the administration will want of them, rather than actually pushing until they are forced into those positions. So I think this is where we're seeing like a lot of the executive orders that come out, and companies or institutions are immediately enforcing them before they are actually enforceable. And I think that we're seeing that with protests as well, is that there's like you said, the need to kind of hold back, or to put ourselves in the kind of the greatest positions of safety, which is it makes sense that human beings want to position ourselves safely. That is not a shameful approach. But I do think that there's a huge threat with that, because then little of it has to actually be legally enforced. We are in effect enforcing executive orders and or other new regulations before they become law. And so actually being in a position of protest is deeply important, especially at this early time. But I will also say that nothing should be done alone or singly. And so it's always where, I sound like a broken record, but, the collective response. And I think in some places, looking at where the terrain is, backing up public school systems that are saying we are going to continue to respect our queer and trans students no matter what. And like, what kind of support does your local school system need to be able to do that? Or the, federal workers who are saying, you're going to take my job from me. You're going to have to rip it from my hands. I'm not giving in to this. And, these pieces where we see protests happening on really critical institutional levels. And I think that's a place that we can really be out and active and supportive, because we know that there's a collective space in which to do that.
Thank you. One theme, and we only have a couple of minutes left, that I'm seeing in a lot of the questions has to do with Trump having gotten 51% of the vote, or being convincing, or being viewed as a very effective communicator. What can we offer as a positive alternative message that will capture hearts as well as minds to bring people back? Do you see that as something that can be done? And Michael, since we had you last before, we'll let you go first this time.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't take too much from Trump's PR and what Fox News has to say about, the grand majority, or, God forbid, mandate. Yes, Trump did better than last time. No doubt he did better with groups that surprised many people. They may be getting buyer's remorse now. I don't know. But I suspect many of them are. We also have to be aware of what they were voting for and against. Some of it, I think, had to do with the disappointment with the Harris campaign, for sure. But if you begin to disaggregate why people vote the way they did, a lot of it had to do with their own perceptions of the economy, which were, as Paul Krugman reminds us daily, were wildly off target. Perceptions of crime, which again, as people remind us, were wildly off target. And questions and concerns about immigration. And so those were the top things. They were probably not voting for 2025, even if they had even if they had ever heard of it. So there are a lot of, but what Trump is doing was what all presidents do, which is claim a huge mandate or agenda and push it as far as you can, be as extreme as you can in these cases. This is not someone who wants to build coalitions. And what he's been doing is, I'm told by my expert colleagues, it is shock and awe, but it's also giving you a frontal assault and seeing how far he can push it, and going as far until he begins to get potentially real resistance. And yeah, that resistance will be internal in the so-called deep state. Some of that resistance will be out on the streets. And some of that resistance, hopefully, will be in Congress as constituents begin to sort of speak up. And, I don't want to say let's just wait for the midterms because that's 2 years off and there can be a lot of damage. But I suspect there are a lot of people who right now are looking at what Trump's doing and saying we didn't vote for this. So I would not necessarily, that 51%, I've got a mandate. Look at Trump is, well within his rights to claim that. But at this point, I think we're all have to be more discerning than believing what Trump or Fox News or any of his allies have to say.
Thank you. We have like about a minute. How can we communicate more effectively, more positively? Dove and then Harris.
Yeah, I think that Trump and the Republican Party are actually very skilled at responding to people who responding to so many Americans who look at the future and say, it doesn't look good, that I do not believe the future will be better than the past, and I am scared about what's coming. And I think that that is a really important element for our side to not capitulate to fear, not give a message of fear, because that leads to authoritarian rule, but to acknowledge the fact that most people looking towards the future do not feel optimistic about what's coming for their families, and then be able to actually give them a vision of the future that they can believe in. And I think something that I feel like our side kind of does not well is we either say, well, we know you're suffering, and so here's a very, very specific policy initiative, or we know you're suffering, and so collective liberation, and we're all going to be well together. And we don't actually give people a right-sized path or sense of how we're going to get to a future that actually responds to what our families need. And I think that it's upon us, especially people with moral leadership, to be able to do that.
Thank you. Harris.
I think we have the numbers. As Michael was saying, Trump did not win with a mandate. He did not win with an absolute majority. There was 19 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 that stayed home. That 19 million people did not show up. Now, what we have to do is make sure that our message, it has to be a message not only of hope, but it has to be a message that we are in this to fight. People want fighters. One of the reasons Trump was able to actually relate to people was because he said he would fight on people's behalf, although he ends up fighting for a very small group of people. We have to develop a language of the fact that we're going to be fighting on people's behalf. And I think if we do that, if we stand and that message is strong, people are looking for strong leaders right now. I think we'll be able to get a lot of folks back by 2026. The midterms, I feel really good about. If we have elections until then, I feel really good about the midterms. I think we will do well.
I want to thank all three of our speakers, and I'm glad you ended on a positive note, that we have a lot to do before 2026. I want to thank everybody who put messages in the chat, and we will continue to review them and get answers where we haven't. I'm going to turn things over now, I believe, to Andra, who's going to tell us a little bit about how we're going to move forward with the second half of this program. Thank you all so much.
So this is the moment, good. So this is the moment when the rubber meets the road. You've heard the speakers share details about the three main issues we're focusing on today. And it's now time for breakout sessions and our collective response. JAMAAT, as most of you know, is an action-based group. So you will have 10 minutes during the breakout session first to identify and come up with a consensus of the most urgent issue needing to be addressed in your respective breakout group. Secondly, another 15 minutes you will have to suggest a specific action to address the issue you've actually identified, which you will share in the report back part of the program. And I will be posing the questions for you on the chat so that you can refer to them. So during the breakout session, we have moderating the immigration, Gary Samp-Leaner with Harris Tarin. For civil liberties, we have Walter Ruby, Maksud Chaudhry, Andrea Barron, and with Professor Barnett moderating the Israel-Palestine area. And of course, for civil liberties, we have Fatima Argun and Dove Kent. After you have joined your group, we would appreciate if you would please select two people, one to be the recorder, report back speaker, to both take notes and also share your issue and the action during the report back. And then the other person to be the timekeeper, to track each of the time segments, the first 10 minutes and of course the second 15 minutes. And then please bear in mind for a few minutes while Vedat is going to arrange these breakout sessions. What we're planning to do is to have you yourselves choose the breakout sessions that you prefer to join. And so to do that, there is, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a little circle with 3 dots all the way to the right. So first, let me call on immigration. I don't know who was appointed to be the recorder speaker in immigration. It could have been Evelyn, and maybe Gary can sort of add some information too. Evelyn?
Well, I thought we had a really good conversation, a small group, and several of us knew each other from other parts of our lives. So it's important. We already had those connections. We talked about working at the local level, trying to support people of different immigration status who are already here, who are getting stuck in the system, providing information, providing access to information for them, and working with institutions such as schools and police forces and others at the local community level to ease their situation, both on the legal front, on the immigration front, but also on access to supports, because a lot of the other policies on health and welfare and education are also affecting these populations. So we didn't have the exact answers, but really working with other groups in the community, whether it's in Montgomery County or in the larger DMV, to be part of these networks that are really supporting people who are already here, helping them avoid deportation, as well as just thrive in our communities.
Thank you, Evelyn. Gary, do you have anything else that you would like to share?
We are a couple of things. One is JAMAAT is a part of the Interfaith Immigration Coalition of 60 different denominations, NGOs who are working on these immigration issues nationally all the time, as well as in the DC area. One thing, it's going to start this coming Tuesday, is the first rally I know of against the refugee ban at the White House at noon, led by Refugee Council USA, and thinking about Horace's idea, which I loved, about just can't let them cow us. It's good to get a turnout for this, and we'll send out information about it for anyone interested. I'll be going myself. There's another rally at 10 on Israel-Palestine, the White House too. So it's good back-to-back Tuesday morning for me. And anyone else who might have time. Secondly, the refugee agencies, the resettlement agencies, are right now being cut off. They are, because it's part of foreign assistance, and just like the AID cutoff, it is applying to refugee agencies. There is a big movement to try to stop that, but if it doesn't stop, one thing that people who volunteers and our NGOs who are privately funded can try to fill in the gaps of what are the resettlement agencies doing for people who are coming here that they are suddenly precluded from doing. And we can try to fill in the gaps there. And again, through the people in our coalition, I would like to work on that. And then third, there is going to be, Harris didn't get into this, but one of the executive orders talks about a new Muslim, it's not a Muslim ban, it's going to be a 60-day study on what countries have deficient vetting systems, and then they will try to ban everyone from those particular countries. And the suspicion is that they will be the Muslim, and I'm sure what our president used to call the shithole countries, and there will be a list of those. there is right now legislation that is, we worked on a few years ago, I worked on quite a bit, called the No Ban Act. It was introduced by Senator Coons and Representative Chu, and it is going to be reintroduced this coming week. I just learned that. And so it probably won't pass, but I think it is a good vehicle to try to get, hopefully keep the administration a little bit more honest and limited in what it's trying to do in those regards.
All right, thank you, Gary. So one of the things, of course, is to be able to develop some type of list of all the different rights that these people have and what they can do to protect themselves, and to post it in different places, different churches in which they belong, and get the word out so that they have some means of protecting themselves and to know their rights. So thank you so much, Evelyn and Gary. Let's move on to civil liberties. Fatima and Dov Kent, what specific issue did your folks decide upon, and what action?
So I was the recorder. I'll briefly review. We had 15 people in this group, so clearly civil liberties are of real concern. In terms of the most urgent issues, we talked about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and issues of self-censorship and anticipatory cooperation. We also looked at, Google caving and issues around media. In terms of specific action, we noticed how with regard to HR 495, it was very important that groups called out what was happening and reached out, and that people worked together. So that's a model. We need to find a way to make noise with our electeds day in, day out. We also had this vision, if they were going to deport students for speech, that we would assemble maybe rabbis, religious leaders of different denominations, to stand with them and say, we don't have to agree with them to feel that deporting people for speech is wrong. We also talked a little bit about messaging, needing to be more succinct and possibly more combative. And we did come up with an action team. We had 6 people volunteer that they would like to be notified when there are things that we need to reach out to our electeds for, and that they would take this on. So I think forming that kind of team for JAMAAT would be a great thing. Fatima led a wonderful session. I don't know if she or Dov want to add something here.
I don't have anything to really add to that. I think, Melanie, you covered it pretty comprehensively. Dov, do you? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks to the team that was there. I think it was a wonderful, very productive and robust conversation.
Okay, so thank you so much for giving such a good report, and I'm so glad so many people participated. And I hope, were you successful getting some people who, out of the 15, who would be helped, who would work on an action team?
We have 6 names.
Wonderful.
Right here on a piece of paper. They won't be forgotten.
Okay, excellent. Okay, this is wonderful. What a wonderful start that is. The next is Israel-Palestine. We had Walter Ruby, Maksud, Andrea Barron, and Professor Barnett. Which of you would like to be able to share the specific issue of concern and possibly an action that we might be able to take as JAMAAT Action Group?
I'll do it. Walter, should I go ahead or do you want to go ahead? Walter?
He's talking. He doesn't know he's muted. Walter, you're muted, but Andrea's going to start, and then maybe you can fill in.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andrea.
If anything else anyone has to add. So we had about 14, 15 people. We had a whole variety of different issues that we were concerned about, and we narrowed them down to a few. One would be, we want to continue the ceasefire. That's going to be negotiated. They're starting to negotiate phase 2. We want to complete phase 2 and phase 3. And we also want to be sure that while that's happening, that there is protection for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. And we can connect that to continuing the ceasefire. And we talked about different kinds of action items. One idea was advocating on Capitol Hill. And I said that that's something that I would be interested in. I didn't get to mention this in our group, but I'm particularly interested if we have a mixed Jewish Arab group, because that, or Jewish Muslim group, that is something that Senator Van Hollen is very interested in. And it doesn't always have to include only people from Maryland. As long as there's some constituents from Maryland, that would be really good. And it's something different than the other groups are not doing. So that was one idea. We only have 3 people committed to that now, Walter, Najla, and myself. I don't know if more would be willing to come to do advocacy in Congress or not, but those are the 3 that we have so far. And the other thing is we have a bunch of demonstrations coming up on February 4th. There's a pro-Israel rally to support a ceasefire, but people could also show up with some banners talking about concern for Palestinians and the release of Palestinian prisoners, and not only the hostages. There is 2 other rallies. I'm not sure if that's February 4th, Najla, one at 11 a.m. and one at 6 p.m. Is that also February 4th?
Yes, and they're both
Okay.
at the White House.
Yeah, so we talked about people attending those rallies, and I hope that Najla and also Reuven will send the information about those 3 different demonstrations to Walter, and so we can spread the information around. So, does
That's
anyone want
great.
to add anything?
I just want to add one thing very quickly. I think one of the things that we were talking about, the February 4th rally in the morning, the one at 10 a.m., which the pro-Israel rally, free the hostages, free the hostages and continue the ceasefire to make sure the hostages are free, but really focusing on the ceasefire. I was very moved that Maksud Chaudhry said, I could be part of that, but we need to get some. It needs to also be about saving Palestinian lives but he said, even so, he's willing to come out and maybe a few other Muslims, and I think that would really help us in really raising consciousness and also building that alliance that Andrea just talked about. So that could be very significant, I think.
Is there anybody else in that group that wanted to add? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I'm so glad that all of these groups. Go ahead.
No, what I was saying, as Walter mentioned, that we need to create a wider coalition between. Should not be just Israeli looking forward to freeing the hostage, but including looking forward to include the Muslim activists who are interested to join to get the hostages freed from Hamas, as well as the prisoners who have been detained in Israeli jails are being tortured. They should be released as well. So if both efforts could be made simultaneously, along with, as Andrea mentioned, that what is happening in West Bank should be stopped, and that could be a big impact by both Muslim and Jews together, if it's possible. That for that reason, that time is very short, but there has to be some meetings ahead of time with some activists from the Muslim side, as well as from those leadership who is leading that rally. So I will talk to Andrea and Walter separately, and then find out some plans. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Maksud. And so I think it's wonderful that that particular group now has a few people that are going to move forward with that. And in addition to the hostage situation, to be fair, not only to the Israelis that are being held, but also to all the people that have been held in the prisons and tortured, which is absolutely awful. And I know that there'll have to be some resolve, and maybe JAMAAT can work towards that, as well as working on trying to help the people in Gaza that are suffering with starvation and not having homes, water, food, and hopefully we can focus on that as well. And what I'd like to do is to turn this over to Gary Sampliner, excuse me, for just a minute or two. He's laughing. So that you can share how people can get in touch with us, because a lot of you are interested not only in the particular topic of the breakout session you were in, but you're interested in all of it, in the civil liberties, immigration, Israel, Palestine. And Gary will tell you how to get in touch with us and possibly post on the chat if you would like to join an action group of some sort. So Gary, would you please share that information?
Okay, I have just done that in the chat. And we have a Facebook group right now in JAMAAT, and we will be keeping or putting up notices of things we'll be getting involved in as we have all along, and encourage people to take a look at that. We have a website. One day it'll finally be up, not quite yet. So our Facebook group is, for the moment, the best vehicle we have. And the one thing I wanted to relate, which is probably obvious, but I'll say it anyway, is that every day we're seeing new things happening, and it's impossible for us to just sit here and say we're going to do this, and this, and we know what we're going to do. So this is going to be changing over time, the things that where we think we can have an impact, and we really will want to hear from you all, as many of you as we can, about where you think in going forward the most productive ways to spend our energy will be. And I'm sure whatever we do is going to be a little different than what you just heard, but we're going to hope to keep working on it and hope to keep hearing from you all about ways that you think a group like us can get involved, and as well as many of you have, as I do, and so many of you do, connections with other groups we can work with on these issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. So we're coming to the end of our program today, and we have prayers for peace that will be given by Charles Stevenson and also Vedat. And I will end with a closing quotation, and then I think we will play the beautiful music from the Jerusalem choir that Vedat is ready to show us. So first, Charles, would you like to give your prayer for peace? Is Charles still here?
I guess Charles is not here.
Okay, let's see. Vedat, can you give your prayer for peace?
Sure.
And I'll see if I can find Charles's prayer.
Sure. I'm going to recite the first verse of Quran as a prayer, and it's the beginning. Its name is the beginning, and we begin and we cite this verse all the time. We make a prayer. All praise is for Allah, Lord of all worlds, the most compassionate, most merciful, Master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us along the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not those you are displeased with or those who are astray. Amen.
Thank you. Amen. Amen. And this prayer was written by Charles Stevenson, who is a wonderful interfaith advocate and activist. He says, "Dear Lord, you and you alone are infinite, absolute, beyond time and eternity, perfect, all light, all love, unchanging, one undivided, whole, and always the same. And we, the children of Abraham, appear to be many, and sometimes seem lost in our manyness as we grope and fumble our way home to you. We are Jews, Christians, and Muslims who pray to you and in you, you who are one undivided and the same. May we, the children of Abraham, follow the path of our prayers and find ourselves and each other, finally, hand in hand, in peace, setting down our divisions to find ourselves one, undivided, and the same in you. Amen. Amen." And with the closing quote that I often use in interfaith gatherings because I think it fits what we do so well. This is from the Quran table spread 5:48. Each of you has your own holy books. Had God wanted, he would have created you one community, but he did not, to test you. So vie then to live with one another and do good works. And today, folks, this is one of the good works that we're all trying to do. Thank you so much. And we will listen to the beautiful music that Vedat will now play with the Jerusalem Choir.
زيتون بتتمع زيت للجميع بلا تخوين بلا قطيع والأرض بالسيف وبالشديد تحملني وذنوبي وحسناتي عيلتي وحارتي نشرة أخبار ولسه بتحكي باسم الزار. They say it's do or die. But when the day is done, what will be left behind? Only you and me with our futures intertwined. We live within the wars, we feel each other's pain. Because of you I know we must choose a different way. יש לה עיניים הכי עצובות בגן והיא עומדת בחורבה שפעם הייתה גן ובוכה על כל אלה שאינם הילדה הכי יפה בגן בשערה עוד ריח השעה
Well, thank you all. This was amazing. And we thank our speakers. We thank our facilitators. We especially thank you, Vedat. God bless you. May Allah shine his nur upon you and your family.
All
for all
pleasure
the
is
good
mine.
work that you did behind the scenes to hold us together.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you. And if the Jerusalem choir of Israelis and Palestinians can sing together in harmony, there's hope for all of us to live in harmony. Thank you all.